knowledge, I have always known numbermen to be the higher echelon. As I was a kid, was told mafioso, as we call it in the black neighborhood, be the mafia. They would have the final say-so on what the number was to come out.
But I mean, there are so many black people betting. Why are they betting on a white man's racket?
Well, they're betting on the white man's racket because he's got the big buck to pay off.
Between 1965 and 1969, newspapers across America, from the Miami Herald in Florida to the Los Angeles Times in California, painted a vivid portrait of organized crime's far-reaching influence. At the center of these revelations stood Anthony, Fat Tony, Salerno, a high-ranking figure in the Vito Genovese Mafia family, whose name repeatedly surfaced in federal investigations and high-profile trials. Whether as an attendee of secret gambling meetings, an orchestrator of policy rackets, or a silent power broker in Las Vegas, Salerno epitomized the underworld's pervasive grip on America's gambling and illicit financial networks. The infamous October 1965 meeting of gamblers in Palm Springs, California, brought together some of the most notorious names in organized crime. Reports from the Miami Herald and the Los Angeles Times detailed how Anthony Salerno, alongside Vincent, Jimmy Blue Eyes, Allo, attended the week-long gathering to discuss territorial rights and the ownership of Caesars Palace Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. Other attendees included Jerome, Jerry, Zarowitz, Elliot Paul Price, showgirl Carolyn Kimura, and actress Victoria Lockwood. The federal investigation, which eventually led to the 1968 conviction of Ruby Lazarus, uncovered details about Salerno's role as a key figure in the Genovese family and his involvement in nationwide gambling operations. By 1966, as described in Jack Anderson's syndicated column, Howard Hughes had begun transforming the Las Vegas Strip by purchasing hotel casinos and displacing some mob elements. However, Salerno's influence persisted. While Nathan Jacobson initially built Caesars Palace into the city's most glamorous casino, Salerno maintained connections to its new manager, Jerome Zarowitz, who was under FBI scrutiny for fixing professional football games. Anderson's 1969 column highlighted Salerno's frequent association with Zarowitz and Ruby Lazarus, linking them to the broader efforts of organized crime to retain a foothold in Las Vegas's lucrative gaming industry. Salerno's operations extended beyond the glitz of Las Vegas to the criminal enterprises of Miami and New York. In 1968, the Miami News detailed how Raymond, Spanish John Marquez, a lieutenant in Salerno's network, controlled a $25 million a year policy racket in Harlem and Spanish Harlem. Marquez, arrested after a 2-year investigation, reportedly ran daytime and nighttime operations with separate banks and numbers, funneling profits back to Salerno and the Genovese family. Salerno's name appeared frequently in connection with federal investigations and trials during this period. In April 1968, the Los Angeles Times reported on Ruby Lazarus's perjury conviction for lying about his activities at the Palm Springs meeting. Salerno's presence at the meeting, alongside Allo and Zarowitz, was repeatedly noted by prosecutors. Additionally, Salerno's influence was implicated in the wider context of organized crime's control over bolita rackets, gambling operations, and financial disputes. By 1969, as articles from the Miami Herald and the New York Times chronicled, Salerno had cemented his reputation as a pivotal figure in organized crime. His reach extended from New York's policy rackets to the neon-lit casinos of Las Vegas, connecting him to figures like Vincent Arlo, Jerome Zarowitz, Ruby Lazarus, and Raymond Marquez. His ability to operate in the shadows, evading direct legal consequences while exerting immense influence, underscored the Mafia's resilience during an era of heightened federal scrutiny. Salerno's story, intertwined with the likes of Howard Hughes, Nathan Jacobson, and other key players, reveals the duality of Las Vegas and America's gambling industry during the mid to late 1960s, a facade of legitimacy masking a web of crime, corruption, and intrigue. As law enforcement sought to dismantle these operations, Salerno remained emblematic of the Mafia's enduring power. On Friday, the 4th of June 1965, Newsday released an article by Bob Greene exposing the chilling intersection of organized crime and the entertainment industry. Mobsters like Sonny Franzese wielded their influence behind the scenes, shaping careers and venues, while law enforcement scrambled to dismantle the underworld's grip on show business. About a year ago, Cosa, Sonny Franzese, got an assignment. Crooner Frank Sinatra Jr. was appearing at the San Susan in Mineola. Franzese's orders were clear: make it a night to remember for Frankie. The next evening, the San Susan was packed with the crowd Franzese had summoned. Long Island's most distinguished bookmakers, loan sharks, and utility hoodlums. Franzese himself presided over the head table as the audience roared for little Frankie. This startling tribute, duly noted by the Nassau District Attorney's Office, is indicative of what authorities now regard as the takeover of large segments of the entertainment business by the underworld. This influence extends far beyond mere crowd padding. It encompasses direct ownership of singers, recording companies, nightclubs, talent agencies, publishing houses, and even the jukeboxes that play the records. In the case of Frank Sinatra Jr., the mob's motives were glaringly apparent. Frank Sinatra Sr. has a long history of mob associations. He worked his way up in nightclubs owned by the mob in New Jersey, with slain hoodlum Willie Moretti serving as his major benefactor. Only 18 months ago, a club largely owned by Sinatra in Nevada lost its gambling license after hosting his associate Salvatore Momo Giancana, the boss of the Chicago mob. The Cosa Nostra's influence on the entertainment industry goes far beyond crowd manipulation. One disillusioned young singer remarked, "You still have to have talent to go anywhere nowadays, but talent isn't enough. You have to sell a piece of yourself to the mob, or all the talent in the world won't get you exposure." This is not to imply that most successful entertainers are owned by the mob, but an increasing number of young hopefuls will never reach stardom without the mob's backing. As one knowledgeable entertainment executive explained, any kid wanting to get started faces massive expenses for publicity, costumes, recording, and all the rest of it. The mob has the money, the clubs, and the studios. How can you blame the kids? Yesterday, Nassau District Attorney William Kahn secured an indictment against hoodlum James Squillante for allegedly attempting to extort $30,000 from the composer of the hit song Java. Kahn also disclosed that narcotics trafficker Frank Pasqua is the former manager of songstress Janet Harper. Additionally, bookmaker and accused extortionist Vincent Squillante, the missing cousin of James Squillante, owns the nightclub Four Joes, while Pasqua once held a 10% stake in Seville Records in New York. There are others. Right now, Jimmy Roselli is billed as one of the East Coast's leading young singing stars. One of his recent achievements was opening at the Copa Cabana, which Cosa Nostra informer Joe Valachi stated 2 years ago was owned by mobster Frank Costello. One of Roselli's close associates is Anthony Buccalo Ferro, a Cosa Nostra soldier who protects the interests of Florida-based mobster Anthony Fat Tony Salerno. New York police sources indicate that Salerno has invested $100,000 in Roselli. Chubby Checker, who introduced the twist, is tied to Roulette Records in Manhattan. The chief salesman for Roulette is Dominic Swats Mulligan, Chiaphone of Hempstead, a Cosa Nostra soldier with a criminal record spanning 9 inches of printed paper. Sonny Franzese, now a self-proclaimed talent scout, theatrical manager and agent, is frequently seen at the office of Capitol Records, one of the largest in the industry, located at 857th Avenue in Manhattan. Meanwhile, Joe Vento, another Cosa Nostra soldier, maintains a desk at D Records in Manhattan. The government, armed with modern legal strategies, has been increasingly successful in apprehending high-ranking mobsters through the rarely used federal tool of immunity. This tactic proved effective recently against Chicago mob leader Salvatore Momo Giancana. For years, the government attempted to put Giancana behind bars for various alleged crimes. Now, by granting him immunity, they have succeeded in jailing the mobster not for what he did, but for his refusal to talk. Giancana is currently sitting in jail until the grand jury term ends in February because he declined to testify despite being promised immunity. The concept of immunity, rarely granted in federal cases, means that a witness cannot be prosecuted for anything disclosed in their testimony. The effect of granting immunity to the reputed Cosa Nostra leader was to send him to jail when he balked at answering the grand jury's questions. Should Giancana decide to change his mind and testify, he would be released, but such a reversal is highly unlikely. Prosecutors view immunity as an essential tool for obtaining convictions. Because individuals cannot be forced to testify against themselves, prosecutors frequently request grand juries to confer immunity to compel reluctant witnesses to speak. Once immunity is granted, a witness can testify freely without fear of prosecution for any revealed crimes. However, immunity comes with an obligation. The witness must testify. Failure to do so can lead to indefinite jail sentences for contempt of court. In federal cases, where immunity is granted, the government wields a powerful weapon to dismantle the silence that has long shielded organized crime. The New York Times, January 18, 1968. Gambler convicted. Accountant faces 32 years for high-stakes betting empire. In a story straight out of the underworld, a New Rochelle accountant who reportedly accepted a staggering single bet of $103,000 on 2 football games was convicted yesterday on 12 gambling-related charges by a federal jury. Pasquale Borghese, a 56-year-old resident of the affluent Weaver Street in New Rochelle, has been unmasked as one of the most prolific gamblers in the eastern United States, according to United States Attorney Robert Morgenthau. Borghese, now staring down the barrel of a maximum 32-year prison sentence, was described by Morgenthau as a kingpin of the gambling world. The trial, presided over by Judge Frederick Van Pelt Bryan, brought to light the audacious scale of Borghese's operations, painting a picture of a man who wielded phones and answering services like weapons in his empire of vice. Assistant United States Attorney Andrew Maloney of Larchmont stunned the court with his revelation that one bettor alone owed Borghese a jaw-dropping $140,000. Cecil Rhodes, a Boston businessman, took the stand to recount how he placed a single bet of $103,000, with Borghese a sum that could buy a house in any number of neighborhoods. Federal authorities revealed Borghese's carefully crafted operation. He conducted his business not from a smoky backroom, but from the anonymity of telephone booths scattered across Westchester County. His clientele was not limited to local gamblers. His reach extended to major cities such as Boston, Washington, Miami, and even the mobbed-up streets of Youngstown, Ohio. Morgenthau noted that Borghese's charmed life in his upscale neighborhood was untouched by law enforcement until 2 years ago, when federal agents apprehended him on what would become a litany of charges. When arrested on a later indictment, Borghese was reportedly in the company of none other than Anthony "Fat Tony" Salerno, a reputed top-echelon mobster. The charges against Borghese were damning: 5 counts of interstate transmission of wagering information, 5 counts of illegal interstate use of telephones, and 2 counts of illegal wagering. While Borghese awaits sentencing, his alleged associates, who reportedly helped run his vast network, are also awaiting their day in court. Borghese's conviction marks a significant blow against the shadowy gambling networks that stretch across the country. Yet the story of the mild-mannered accountant with a penchant for high-stakes bets raises questions about how many others like him remain hidden behind the veneer of ordinary life. Pasquale Borghese, a man who outwardly embodied the image of a proper New Rochelle accountant, was unmasked yesterday as one of the most powerful bookmakers in the eastern United States. Known for his conservative attire and his life of suburban luxury in a $100,000 home, Borghese now faces 4 years in federal prison and a $20,000 fine for masterminding an intricate interstate gambling empire. Federal Judge Frederick Bryan, who presided over the case, handed down the sentence, but granted Borghese the opportunity to remain free on $5,000 bail while he appealed his October 25th conviction. Borghese, described as a meticulous operator who ran his gambling empire under the alias Paul Martin, is accused of accepting only high-stakes wagers, starting at $500 on everything from professional sports to major elections, though he conspicuously avoided horse racing. One witness during Borghese's trial testified to placing an eye-watering $103,000 bet with him on 2 professional football games, a claim that highlighted the sheer scale of his operations. Federal investigators estimated that Borghese's illicit empire raked in between $5 million and $10 million annually, an astounding figure that underscored his status as a gambling kingpin. Federal authorities revealed Borghese's ties to some of the most feared figures in organized crime, including Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, a captain in Vito Genovese's powerful Cosa Nostra family, and a major bookmaker in East Harlem. According to United States Attorney Robert Morgenthau, the case was the result of an exhaustive 11-month investigation that spanned multiple states and exposed the complexity and evils of the organized gambling syndicate. The operation's sophistication was laid bare during the trial. Borghese reportedly utilized eavesdropping-proof public telephone booths and ran his empire with a blend of technology and guile. Federal agents from the Intelligence Division of the Internal Revenue Service painstakingly gathered evidence, even employing wiretaps to infiltrate the intricate web of communications that fueled his empire. In addition to his gambling ventures, prosecutors revealed Borghese's connections to legitimate businesses that served as fronts for his illicit activities. He co-owned the Maple Leaf Tavern at 578 Fordham Road and operated an accounting office under the name Borghese and Aleva at 2115 Williamsbridge Road, both in the Bronx. Morgenthau concluded the case with a stark reminder of the stakes. This prosecution demonstrates the scale, complexity, and corrosive influence of organized gambling. It is a vivid example of how deeply rooted these syndicates have become in our society. For a man who once appeared to be a quiet accountant living a picturesque suburban life, Pasquale Borghese's fall from grace has revealed a criminal enterprise that thrived in the shadows of ordinary life. With his empire now dismantled, the consequences of his double life are set to reverberate far beyond his own sentencing. On Monday, the 23rd of May 1966, the Miami Herald published Bob Greene's investigative piece, The Florida Crime Tree, a detailed exposé tracing the roots and expansion of organized crime in South Florida. The article unveils how figures like Meyer Lansky and his associates transitioned from Prohibition-era bootlegging to modern ventures such as jukebox motion pictures and Las Vegas casinos. With branches extending across cities and decades, the syndicate's influence continues to thrive, revealing the enduring power and adaptability of organized crime in America. Organized crime in South Florida is a money tree with roots extending to other cities and other times. It has grown because syndicate executives have always been alert to new opportunities while catering to humanity's ancient vices. Over 4 decades of syndicate evolution separate the era of the speakeasy from the modern marvels like the Scopitone, a jukebox motion picture device designed for bars and restaurants. Not only have the products become more sophisticated, but the methods used to exploit them have also evolved. The men who once smuggled bootleg liquor across Lake Erie in armored boats now employ sophisticated legal and economic tools to achieve the same basic goal: making money. To understand how an office at 420 Lincoln Road in Miami Beach in 1966 connects to one at 500 Fifth Avenue in New York City in 1934, one needs only to follow the career of Meyer Lansky of Hallandale, a city in Broward County just north of the Dade County line. Lansky began as a bootlegger in New York City and survived the violent civil wars of the Prohibition era to become a leader of the Eastern Syndicate. Other notable survivors from that time include Charles, Lucky, Luciano, Benjamin, Bugsy, Siegel, Louis, Lepke, Buchalter, Joe, Dotto, Adonis, Vincent, Jimmy Blue Eyes, Arlo, and Frank Costello. As described previously in The Herald, Lansky and his New York allies joined with leaders of the Cleveland Syndicate to adapt to the challenges of legalized liquor, forming the Molaska Corporation with offices at 500 Fifth Avenue. The Cleveland partners included Sam Tucker, Morris Kleinman, and Mo Dalitz, who would later play a pivotal role in Las Vegas. Ultimately, illegal gambling captured the syndicate's attention, and they left the liquor business to their lieutenants. One such subordinate, Louis Pokras, was an old-time bootlegger who established the Capital Wine and Spirits Corporation. The business lasted for 12 years before running afoul of the Treasury Department. Pokras failed to disclose details such as his own criminal record and the secret ownership stake held by Frank Costello. When Capital Wine and Spirits permits were revoked, Pokras sold the company and reinvested the proceeds in the Flamingo Hotel, a venture promoted by Lansky's old partner Bugsy Siegel in Las Vegas. Despite this setback, liquor continued to attract Pokras, and he soon established a new company at the old syndicate headquarters at 500 Fifth Avenue. This time, bribes to key officials helped avoid the earlier pitfalls, but Pokras's attention was soon diverted. Syndicate ventures into television. The arrival of television presented new opportunities. The syndicate recognized the potential of the new medium, which they considered as mesmerizing as bootleg liquor for the public. Syndicate leaders initially viewed television as a tool for taverns rather than private homes. Pokras soon became the head of Consolidated Television Corporation, partnering with figures such as Frank Costello, Joe Bananas Bonanno, and Meyer Lansky. During testimony before the Kefauver Committee in 1951, Lansky described how the syndicate became involved. "We learned a lot about the jukebox business," he explained, referencing the syndicate's experience with coin-operated devices like slot machines. "We would buy a route, maybe someone's jukebox route, and build it up, then try to sell it." Lansky added, "We started to build television sets, but I think we went in at the wrong end of it. We thought the commercial end was the best part. We should have gone into the home set market. Maybe I would have been a very rich man today." Today, Lansky's wealth is estimated at $300 million, much of it believed to be held in numbered accounts at the International Credit Bank of Switzerland. Although Lansky's early television ventures were ahead of their time, they laid the groundwork for future opportunities. Lansky's Cleveland partners even remodeled an old gambling casino, the Pettibone Club, to create a studio for producing short films, or soundies, for bars and restaurants. When this venture failed to pay off immediately, Consolidated Television reorganized into Teleking, and Lansky turned to other interests in New Orleans, Broward County, and Havana. The expansion of syndicate power. The Cleveland Syndicate capitalized on Bugsy Siegel's pioneering work in Las Vegas by developing the Desert Inn and Stardust Hotel complex. 15 years after Lansky's initial television experiments, a federal grand jury in New York began investigating a new venture bearing striking similarities. Led by United States Attorney Robert Morgenthau, the grand jury sought information on Telesign, a Chicago-based company marketing the Scopitone device, a jukebox combined with a motion picture projector. Morgenthau, determined to continue the war on crime initiated by former Attorney General Robert Kennedy, subpoenaed witnesses to provide records involving individuals such as Meyer Lansky, Vincent, Jimmy Blue Eyes, Alo, Gerald Katina, Abe Green, Thomas Eberly, Clifford Jones, Alvin Malnik, and Jay Weiss. The subpoenas also targeted financial institutions, including the International Credit Bank, the Union Bank of Switzerland, the Nassau-based Bank of World Commerce, and Atlas Bank Limited. Jimmy Blue Eyes Alo, Lansky's neighbor in Broward County, was once selected to replace Joe Adonis after Adonis's deportation. Alo later succeeded Frank Costello as the syndicate's coordinator, bridging Lansky and Mafia leaders such as Michael, Trigger Mike Copa in South Florida, and Gerald Katina and Thomas Eboli in New York and New Jersey. Katina and Eboli assumed leadership of the Vito Genovese Mafia family after Genovese's imprisonment on narcotics charges. Abe Green, a high-ranking courier, transported cash for Lansky and Katina while managing vending machine interests. Clifford Jones, the former lieutenant governor of Nevada, acted as Lansky's front at the Thunderbird Hotel in Las Vegas, concealing his investments. Jones was later implicated in perjury charges linked to his business partner Bobby Baker. Other individuals, including Miami Beach attorney Alvin Malnik and Jay Weiss, were tied to stock transactions and various syndicate operations. Malnik, a young lawyer with offices at 420 Lincoln Road, Miami Beach, quickly rose through the syndicate's ranks and credited his success to his ability to forge influential friendships. Thus, the Florida crime tree, rooted in syndicate history, continues to grow and flourish, extending its branches across cities and decades. On Tuesday, the 24th of May 1966, the Miami Herald published the second in a two-part series by Hank Messick detailing the life and rise of Alvin Malnik. Known for his shrewd legal mind and ability to forge powerful connections, Malnik emerged as a key figure in South Florida syndicate circles. With deep ties to figures like Meyer Lansky and Jimmy Blue Eyes, Malnik navigated a world where crime and commerce intertwined, leveraging friendships to build a fortune that spanned financial institutions, stock ventures, and revolutionary technologies like the Scopitone. Messick's article exposes how this friendship theory allowed Malnik and the syndicate to flourish while reform efforts faltered. Alvin Malnik is a man who places great value on friendship, and the sheer number and quality of his connections have left more than one investigator astonished. Operating from his base on Lincoln Road in Miami Beach, the 32-year-old attorney has been linked to international gangsters, enigmatic Swiss bankers, criminal elements within organized labor, and top-tier syndicate gamblers. His involvement, however, goes far beyond the traditional lawyer-client relationship. Malnik has actively participated as a principal in vast financial deals, primarily revolving around stock promotions. Born in St. Louis, Missouri in 1933, Malnik earned his Bachelor of Arts degree from Washington University in 1954. After serving 2 years in the United States Army, he enrolled in the University of Miami Law School, graduating in 1959. Even before completing his law degree, Malnik was already engaged in business, a second mortgage brokerage that marked the beginning of his long string of official investigations. It was perhaps the mortgage business that first connected Malnik to gambler Al Moniz, who was recently indicted by a federal grand jury in Miami following a Miami Herald expose on his nationwide bookmaking operation, facilitated through his now-defunct Metro Mortgage Company. As late as 1963, Malnik shared office space with Metro Mortgage and Joseph Liebman, Moniz's chief lieutenant. Later, Malnik relocated to 695 Lincoln Road, where his law clerk was Daniel Weiselberg, Moniz's nephew, who alternated between using Moniz's name and Malnik's. Daniel lived at Moniz's home and worked for him at Metro Mortgage. In his personal life, Malnik demonstrated an equal knack for cultivating valuable relationships. In September 1962, he sold a Miami property to a known associate of Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, a high-ranking lieutenant of Michael Trigger Mike Copa and a major figure in New York's numbers racket. Malnik then moved to the Hampshire house in Miami Beach, where his neighbors included notable figures such as gambler Joseph, the Possum, Nesline, Charles, the Blade, Tureen, and Irving, Nig, Devine. Around this time, Devine became a stockholder with Malnik in the Bank of World Commerce Limited, based in Nassau. By then, Malnik's career was accelerating. He leased a home in Los Angeles while serving as general counsel, secretary, and director of Allied Empire, Incorporated. This company became deeply involved in acquiring and promoting savings and loan associations across Maryland, New Mexico, California, and Hawaii. Philip Matthews, a former California State Bank examiner, served as president of Allied Empire, which also dabbled in television and film production. Another key figure in this enterprise was Mike Singer, a former Teamster official and partner of Irving Devine in ventures such as the New York Meat and Provisions Company of Las Vegas. Allied Empire experienced a dramatic rise in its stock value during 1961, but encountered a significant hurdle when Matthews failed to gain control of Ewa Plantation Limited in Hawaii, despite spending over $500,000. This failure, coupled with Singer's unsuccessful attempt to unionize the island for the Teamsters, led to their withdrawal from the project. Allied Empire was subsequently renamed Riverside Financial Corporation, and Malnik exited the venture. The Bank of World Commerce was established in Nassau in mid-1961, with Allied Empire holding a significant share of its stock. By 1962, investigators reported that the bank was intended to finance professional gamblers setting up Caribbean casinos. The bank's only employee, Charlotte Rodeau, stated that she took orders exclusively from Maya Singer and Alvin Malnik. The bank's stockholders included prominent figures now under investigation by a federal grand jury in New York: Edward Levinson, Clifford A. Jones, John Pullman, Irving Devine, and Alvin Malnik. John Pullman, the bank's president, was a Russian-born Canadian national residing in Switzerland. He provided substantial loans to well-known gamblers, including Ed Levinson, Mike Levinson, and Louis, Sleepout Louis, Levinson, as well as to Al Moniz's Florida Corporation. Malnik openly credits much of his success to his ability to forge beneficial relationships. Among his influential friends was Vincent Arlo, better known as Jimmy Blue Eyes. Arlo, a close associate of Meyer Lansky and a coordinator of syndicate and mafia activities, played a significant role in Malnik's rise. Arlo's support helped Malnik's net worth grow from less than $5,000 in 1958 to over $2 million in 1964. One pivotal moment came when Malnik learned of a French invention for projecting pictures and sound, described by the late George Wood of the William Morris Theatrical Agency. Malnik traveled to Paris to secure the rights to the Scopitone, a jukebox-like device that played music videos on a 26-inch screen for a quarter. Lansky and the syndicate had envisioned a similar device in the 1940s, but Malnik's version brought the idea to fruition. Malnik formed Scopitone, Incorporated, and struck a deal with the William Morris Agency to pay a 10% finder's fee on the cost of films produced and advertising revenue generated by Scopitone. In July 1964, Telesign, Incorporated, a Chicago-based company, acquired 80% of Scopitone's stock, issuing 850,000 shares of its common stock in exchange. Malnik retained 20% of Scopitone and received 527,422 shares of Telesign, valued at over $2 million. Malnik's vice president in Scopitone, Jay Weiss, also received substantial shares. Both men were given annual salaries and exclusive rights to market Scopitone in Florida. The stock's value soared from 90 cents per share to nearly $19 before declining. As the stock peaked, Malnik and Weiss adjusted their holdings, relinquishing shares to other original partners, including Abe Green and Alfred Miniaci. Miniaci hosted Frank Costello the night of the infamous 1957 assassination attempt, further linking Malnik's ventures to underworld figures. Malnik and his associates eventually sold their remaining Scopitone shares to Telesign's president Steiger in a cash transaction reportedly worth $1 million. Other partners included figures tied to organized crime, such as Aaron Weisberg, part owner of the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, and Abe Cohen. Malnik's ability to thrive in these ventures exemplifies what he calls the friendship theory, where success relies on forging active and mutually beneficial relationships. Meanwhile, the crime syndicate, rooted in men like Lansky and Jimmy Blue Eyes, continues to flourish in South Florida, leaving grand juries and reform efforts struggling to keep pace. Corruption grows deeper, and the odds of lasting change grow ever slimmer. On Wednesday, August 10, 1966, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram published Sandy Smith's exposé uncovering the secret ties between organized crime and the glamorous facade of Las Vegas casinos. The report revealed that 8 notorious gangsters, including Salvatore Giancana, Raymond Patriarca, and Anthony Salerno, held hidden stakes in Caesar's Palace, a $25 million casino and hotel complex set to open on Friday. Through skimming operations and kickback schemes, the mob siphoned millions from casino profits, evading taxes and corrupting the industry. The revelations underscored the enduring grip of organized crime on Las Vegas, leaving state and federal authorities scrambling to respond. 5 additional gangsters have been identified as holding secret interests in the Caesars Palace gambling casino, scheduled to open on Friday in Las Vegas, Nevada. This revelation brings the total number of crime syndicate figures tied to the casino to 8. Caesars Palace, part of a $25 million hotel complex, has come under intense scrutiny as allegations of mob infiltration continue to surface. At the same time, the Chicago Sun-Times reported that 2 of these gangsters, Chicago mob boss Salvatore, Momo, Giancana, and New England rackets overlord Raymond Patriarca, collect cash commissions on the gambling losses of businessmen, tourists, and conventioneers flown to Las Vegas on junkets arranged by casino owners. Each gangster reportedly receives a 10% kickback on the losses incurred by gamblers they shepherd to the casinos. Earlier reports from the Chicago Sun-Times revealed that Giancana, Patriarca, and New Jersey crime lord Jerry Catena, held hidden interests in Caesar's Palace. The 5 newly identified secret stakeholders are Jerry Angiulo, Henry Tamelio, and Joseph Anselmo, all members of Patriarca's Cosa Nostra family operating in the Boston and Providence, Rhode Island area. Anthony, Fat Tony, Salerno, and Joseph Palermo, rackets bosses operating in New York City and New Jersey. The dividends from these hidden shares are allegedly paid out to the gangsters through skimming operations, where cash is illegally siphoned from the casino's house winnings to evade both Nevada gambling taxes and federal income taxes. In just 6 Las Vegas casinos, skimming operations have reportedly diverted over $6 million in a single year. Gangsters have gone to great lengths to conceal their casino holdings from legitimate stockholders licensed by Nevada authorities as casino owners. Some of these licensed casino owners are reportedly unaware that their establishments have been infiltrated by organized crime. In response to the allegations, Nathan S. Jacobson, president of Caesars Palace, issued a statement denying any connection between the casino and organized crime. In a telegram sent to Emmett Dedman, editor of the Chicago Sun-Times, Jacobson called the report the worst example of American democracy and indicative of moral degeneration and indecent behavior. He demanded that the Sun-Times issue a retraction and make clear that its account of the undercover interests of Patriarca, Giancana, and Catena was unfounded and untrue. The Chicago Sun-Times replied with a telegram defending its reporting. It read, "The Sun-Times story on Caesar's Palace, referred to in your telegram of August 1st, was one of a number of articles on gambling practices in Las Vegas. We believe the information vital to a proper public assessment of state and federal procedures, particularly pertaining to tax revenue collection. For the protection of yourself and your investors, who may be unaware of some of these practices, we suggest an investigation as thorough and objective as that we have been conducting. The scheme involving commissions on gambling losses was reportedly devised by Patriarca himself. His Cosa Nostra lieutenants in Boston and Springfield, Massachusetts, have allegedly been collecting under-the-table fees for years by arranging junket flights of businessmen and tourists to casinos in Las Vegas and the Bahamas. On one such flight to Las Vegas, travelers arranged by Patriarca's men lost over $250,000 in several casinos, including the Dunes. From these losses, Patriarca's associates collected a 10% fee, amounting to $25,000. In recent weeks, the Chicago Sun-Times learned that Patriarca's Boston area lieutenants have been urging businessmen and gamblers to travel to Las Vegas for the highly anticipated grand opening of Caesar's Palace. The allegations of organized crime involvement in Caesar's Palace and the lucrative kickback schemes associated with casino junkets underscore the persistent infiltration of mob influence in Las Vegas. These revelations also highlight the broader issue of corruption in the gambling industry, posing challenges to both state and federal authorities tasked with regulating casino operations. On Monday, October 31, 1966, the Miami Herald revealed the contents of a long-suppressed diary by Anne Draman, the second wife of Michael "Trigger Mike" Coppola. The diary offered an intimate look into the life of one of the Mafia's most secretive and ruthless figures, recounting his violent tendencies, immense wealth, and rise to power in New York and South Florida. From hidden cash stashes and connections to mob elites like Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano, to a life of abuse and tragedy, Anne's writings exposed the dark underbelly of Coppola's reign. Her revelations painted a chilling portrait of the Mafia's influence and the devastating personal toll it inflicted. A long-suppressed diary by Anne Draman, the late second wife of Michael, Trigger Mike Coppola, offers a rare glimpse into the secretive and violent life of one of the Mafia's most active leaders in New York and South Florida. The diary recounts how Coppola once counted $219,000 in cash in an upstairs room of their Miami Beach home, explaining that it was his share of Harlem gambling profits. Coppola, who rose to power in New York City and South Florida, died on October the 1st in a Boston hospital following a 2-week illness. His funeral was held the next day in New York City, conducted so discreetly that federal agents were unaware of it until it was over, and the press did not hear about it for another 2 days. Clearly, the Mafia intended for Coppola to die as he had lived, in obscurity. The diary, suppressed for 4 years, reveals intimate details about Coppola's life, from his rise to power to his personal relationships and violent tendencies. Coppola's ascent in the underworld began in New York City. Following the syndicate-ordered murder of Dutch Schultz, Coppola took control of the numbers racket in East Harlem, which became a lucrative enterprise. However, his involvement in the suspected murder of a local political leader, Joseph Scottorigio, made him a target for investigators. When authorities tried to break him by bringing his first wife before a grand jury and later indicting her for perjury, their plan failed. She died in childbirth while still under indictment. Disillusioned with New York, Coppola began spending more time in Miami Beach, following the example of other top mobsters. On October 30, 1950, he purchased a sprawling home at 4431 Alton Road from John King Angasola, a veteran of Cleveland's Mayfield road mob. Tax stamps indicated a purchase price of about $30,000, a suspiciously low figure for such a large and luxurious property. Coppola soon decided he needed a wife to match his status. Through his connections, including Gil, the Brain, Beckley, and Frank, Screw Andrews, Coppola was introduced to Anne Draman, a widow managing a dress shop in Cincinnati. Anne's first husband, Charles Draman, had been the casino manager of the syndicate-controlled Lookout House near Covington, Kentucky, and had died in a plane crash in 1952. Coppola pursued Anne relentlessly, eventually marrying her on December 28, 1955. The wedding reception was held at the Beverly Hills Club near Newport, Kentucky, and the couple spent their honeymoon at their Miami Beach home. The marriage, however, was fraught with violence and abuse. Anne's diary describes numerous incidents, including one where Coppola enraged during a dinner party, fetched a gun and shot at her, calling her a flat-nosed, frog-eyed bastard. She narrowly avoided the bullet, crediting divine intervention for her survival. Anne's diary reveals that Coppola forced her to endure 4 abortions performed on their kitchen table by a syndicate doctor who charged $1,000 per procedure. Despite the violence, Coppola lavished Anne with gifts to display his wealth and status, including $250,000 in cash, jewelry, furs, and fine clothes. Coppola's wealth was substantial, with couriers delivering enormous sums of money from his Harlem numbers racket. Anne recounted one Christmas season when Coppola retrieved a package containing $219,000 from the freezer at his favorite hangout, the Midtown Social Club on Liberty Avenue. By the end of 1959, Anne estimated that Coppola had amassed $340,000 in cash, hidden in 5 secret compartments within their Alton Road home. Coppola's influence extended deep into organized crime. Anne's Christmas list from 1959, compiled at Coppola's insistence, read like a who's who of the Mafia, with names that later appeared in Joe Valachi's testimony before the McClellan Committee. Among those listed were Philip Lombardo, Frank Livorsi, Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, and Vincent Jimmy Blue Eyes Alo. Lucky Luciano, noted as the residing in Naples, Italy. Prominent associates such as Mo Dalitz, Sleepout Louis Levinson, Gil Beckley, and Meyer Lansky. The list also included non-mafia figures like Ed McGrath, John Scalish, and Nick Donato, highlighting Coppola's broad network of criminal and legitimate connections. The marriage ended in 1960 when Coppola sued Anne for divorce, citing her use of bad language in front of his children. The separation was contentious, with Anne later cooperating with an Internal Revenue Service investigation against Coppola. Though it went against her upbringing, she wrote, "I learned at an early age it was most admirable not to be a stool pigeon." Her desire for revenge outweighed her reservations. Her testimony contributed to Coppola's guilty plea to tax evasion, resulting in a 9-month sentence in federal prison in Atlanta. During Coppola's incarceration, Anne fled to Europe, ostracized by Mafia social circles. On September 18, 1962, she was found dead in a Rome hotel room. Police ruled her death a suicide, a conclusion supported by a letter to then Attorney General Robert Kennedy and an entry in her diary. "Death shall be a blessing to me. Mike and I shall both pay." After his release from prison, Coppola returned to Miami Beach, where he resumed his role as a banker for loan sharks and top bettors like Gil Beckley. He developed a passion for growing orchids at his Alton Road home, the same house where he had once hidden cash and performed abortions on his wife. Coppola's death on October 1, 1965, went largely unnoticed outside of underworld circles. True to his life's pattern, he passed away inconspicuously, leaving behind a legacy of violence, wealth, and secrecy that epitomized the Mafia's grip on American society. On Saturday, March 11, 1967, the Miami Herald reported on the federal ultimatum facing Ruby Lazarus, a prominent Miami bookmaker known as Fat Ruby. Lazarus was ordered to testify before a United States grand jury investigating a high-stakes gathering of national gambling racketeers during the 1965 World Series in Palm Springs. Linked to figures like Vincent Alo, Anthony Salerno, and Meyer Lansky, Lazarus is accused of participating in discussions about gambling operations and the ownership of Las Vegas's Caesars Palace. Refusal to cooperate could lead to contempt charges and jail time, as federal investigators intensified their efforts to dismantle organized crime's grip on the gambling industry. Veteran Miami bookmaker Ruby Lazarus, known as Fat Ruby, was presented with a stark choice on Friday: cooperate with investigators or face jail time. Lazarus was granted immunity from prosecution and ordered to testify before a United States grand jury, investigating a World Series gathering of national gambling racketeers. Failure to comply could result in contempt charges and imprisonment. Federal authorities are probing a series of meetings that took place in October 1965 in Palm Springs, California, approximately 100 miles southeast of Los Angeles. These gatherings, coinciding with the World Series between the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Minnesota Twins, were reportedly held at the home of two showgirls who had previously been granted immunity. Lazarus is being questioned about his presence at these meetings, which also allegedly included prominent underworld figures such as Vincent, Jimmy Blue Eyes, Alo, and Anthony, Fat Tony, Salerno, both high-ranking members of the Cosa Nostra family, headed by Vito Genovese. Alo of Hollywood, Florida, is a known associate of Meyer Lansky and other South Florida crime figures including Hyman, Fat Jaime, Martin. Others reportedly in attendance were Jerome Jerry Zarowitz, a sometimes Miami resident, and Elliot Paul Price, both associated with Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. Zarowitz, a longtime associate of Lazarus, was convicted in 1947 of attempting to fix a professional football game between the Chicago Bears and the New York Giants, serving 20 months in prison. 10 years later, Zarowitz and Lazarus were questioned during an investigation into a Terre Haute, Indiana, bookmaking operation, which reportedly handled $10 million in bets on football and the World Series over a span of 2.5 months. Both invoked the Fifth Amendment and continued their bookmaking operations in Dade County unhindered, according to investigators. In the ongoing Los Angeles investigation, United States District Judge A. Andrew Hawk ordered Lazarus to testify following a hearing that shed further light on the government's objectives. A transcript of the grand jury proceedings revealed that Lazarus was questioned about discussions at the Palm Springs meetings, specifically regarding the operation of gambling in the eastern United States. Additionally, federal prosecutors pressed Lazarus on whether the meetings addressed ownership divisions of Caesar's Palace, the sprawling hotel casino in Las Vegas, that includes several investors from Dade County. Lazarus was also interrogated about phone calls he allegedly made to Miami bookies John and Chris Prokos, both of whom are now facing federal prison sentences, and other gamblers across the nation. The grand jury's mandate was recently extended by court order for an additional 60 days, giving investigators more time to pursue leads. Meanwhile, Lazarus attempted to delay contempt proceedings, citing the unavailability of his Miami attorney, David Rosen, who was occupied defending another client, Gil the Brain Beckley, a prominent national bookmaking figure. Judge Hawk refused Lazarus's request for a delay, advising him to retain local counsel instead. "You're pretty sophisticated judging from your associates," the judge remarked. "You'd better get yourself a local attorney." Lazarus expressed concerns about potential retaliation from the Mafia or syndicate figures if he cooperated. Addressing these fears, Judge Hawk pointed to the two showgirls who had testified earlier in the investigation, despite similar apprehensions. "They are still healthy and vigorous young ladies," the judge noted. "Nothing was done to them by the Cosa Nostra, the Mafia, or the syndicate. I strongly feel in your case you can testify without worry from the mob." The investigation into the Palm Springs meetings is a significant development in federal efforts to uncover the inner workings of organized crime in the gambling industry. With connections to figures like Vincent Allo, Anthony Salerno, and Meyer Lansky, the case underscores the pervasive influence of the Mafia in both legitimate and illicit enterprises. Whether Ruby Lazarus chooses to testify or face jail time remains a crucial question as the probe continues. On May 10, 1967, George Wackenhut, Florida's crime war general, revealed shocking corruption involving sheriffs, government officials, and organized crime figures across the state. His investigations exposed bribery, bolita gambling, and law enforcement complicity, alongside moral failings like the exploitation of vulnerable women and minors. With ties to Cosa Nostra, figures like Vincent Allo and Anthony Salerno, Wackenhut's findings intensified calls for statewide reform to combat organized crime and political misconduct. George Wackenhut, appointed by Governor Claude Kirk as Florida's crime war general, revealed shocking levels of corruption in the state during a news conference. Wackenhut stated that his investigations uncovered pervasive misconduct involving sheriffs, local government officials, and even reaching the state level. Although he declined to name specific individuals or provide full details, Wackenhut's findings highlight deep-seated issues within Florida's law enforcement and public offices. Wackenhut reported that his team of 31 investigators has been stretched thin, conducting investigations in Broward County and most of Florida's 67 counties. Despite facing extreme handicaps, including resistance from certain officials, his office has received 933 letters and numerous phone calls supplying information. Approximately 30% of these tips, he noted, had substantial merit, a figure he described as unusually high. When pressed by reporters, Wackenhut hinted that the investigation had reached the cabinet level, but provided no further details. His ongoing work underscores the need for a statewide crime force, a proposal under consideration by the Florida legislature. Governor Kirk, present at the news conference, reiterated his support for creating a statewide Department of Justice, which he described as the perfect instrument to combat crime. Kirk also expressed approval of Senator Robert Chevin's proposal for a statewide crime board, referring to it as a group of untouchables. However, Wackenhut disclosed that the costs of Florida's crime war have exceeded earlier estimates of $1,000 a day. Moreover, Kirk is 2 months behind in paying bills owed to Wackenhut's agency. Wackenhut's report outlined numerous instances of political, professional, and moral corruption, including court misconduct, an official falsifying court records and pocketing bond forfeitures. Tax fraud. A county official saving friends tens of thousands of dollars by lowering property assessments. Profiteering from prison labor, county employees exploiting prison labor for personal gain. Bolita operations. 2 public officials competing to control local Bolita gambling operations, part of a larger national syndicate. Bribery. Officials accepting bribes to overlook violations of regulatory laws, or soliciting bribes and kicking back a portion to higher officials. Wackenhut confirmed that several high-ranking members of La Cosa Nostra, particularly those affiliated with the Vito Genovese family, are actively operating in Florida. These figures include Vincent, Jimmy Blue Eyes, Allo, Anthony, Fat Tony, Salerno, Pasquale Michael Erra, George Smura, Georgie, Blah Blah Blair, Thomas, Tommy Palmer, Greco, and Joseph, Joe Sweets, Patera. Since Wackenhut's appointment 4 months ago, his team has made 26 arrests involving 23 individuals across 71 criminal counts, ranging from breaking and entering to prostitution. Among those charged was longtime Dade County Bolita bagman Red Rainwater, indicted for perjury based on information provided by Wackenhut's investigators. When asked about the root cause of corruption in public office, Wackenhut attributed it to one-party dominance in Florida's political landscape. "I'm not picking on the Democrats. I'm a registered Democrat," he said, but noted, "Where you have one-party rule, you have this." Wackenhut's revelations, while troubling, underscore the importance of the ongoing investigations and legislative efforts to address Florida's corruption and crime problem. His findings have not only exposed systemic issues, but also sparked renewed calls for reform in the state's approach to combating organized crime and political misconduct. On Thursday, May 11, 1967, the Miami Herald reported George Wackenhut's explosive testimony before a legislative committee, revealing the deep entrenchment of organized crime in Florida. Naming over 50 Mafia leaders, including Santo Trafficante Jr. and Meyer Lansky, Wackenhut outlined a network controlling gambling, loansharking, and real estate across the state. With Florida serving as a critical hub for national syndicate operations, his findings highlighted the urgent need for statewide crime-fighting initiatives to dismantle the Mafia's pervasive influence. On Thursday, May 11, 1967, the Miami Herald reported George Wackenhut's explosive testimony before a legislative committee, revealing the deep entrenchment of organized crime in Florida. Naming over 50 Mafia leaders, including Santo Trafficante Jr. and Meyer Lansky, Wackenhut outlined a network controlling gambling, loansharking, and real estate across the state. With Florida serving as a critical hub for national syndicate operations, his findings highlighted the urgent need for statewide crime-fighting initiatives to dismantle the Mafia's pervasive influence. Organized crime, led by a contingent of 100 Mafia members, has deeply embedded itself in both criminal and legitimate activities across Florida, according to George Wackenhut, director of the Governor's War on Crime. Testifying before a joint legislative committee on crime, Wackenhut revealed that the Mafia's influence extends across South and Central Florida, as well as the Tampa Bay area. Wackenhut named more than 50 high-ranking crime lords during his testimony, emphasizing that he could have listed 5 times as many. His detailed account painted a picture of a state heavily infiltrated by organized crime, spanning gambling, loansharking, and real estate investments. Wackenhut provided the following updates on prominent Mafia figures and their activities. Santo Trafficante Jr. Once the Mafia boss of Tampa, Trafficante is now headquartered in Miami and resides at 523 Northwest 71st Street. He oversees Mafia operations in Tampa and Orlando, where his lieutenant, Samuel Cacciatore, runs a criminal organization that extends throughout Central Florida, coordinating Bolita operations with networks in Georgia. Meyer Lansky, described as possibly the biggest man in gambling throughout the country today. Lansky, residing at 612 Hibiscus Lane, Hallandale, earns approximately $250,000 every 2 weeks by skimming profits from Las Vegas casinos. Yiddy Bloom and Isidore Bloom, members of the Minneapolis Syndicate and close associates of Lansky, the Bloom brothers have heavily invested in Miami Beach real estate and maintain connections to gambling operations. Pasquale, Little Paddy. Error. A member of the Vito Genovese family and former lieutenant of Michael, Trigger Mike, Coppola, Error manages Dean Martin's restaurant at 1850 79th Street Causeway in North Bay Village. Recently released from an 8-month jail sentence for failing to file income tax returns, Error reportedly has over $1 million in Shylock money circulating in South Florida and makes loans of up to $50,000. Wackenhut also alleged that Error controls a high-ranking police officer in South Florida and that his brother Mike serves as a mob enforcer. Joseph Silesi. Identified as operating the largest floating gambling games in South Florida, Silesi plays a significant role in local gambling operations. Joseph Massey, also known as Joseph Massey, a Detroit mob member residing at 520 Lakeview Court, Miami Beach, and owner of the Miami Provision Company, Massey is another significant figure in the Florida Mafia network. Angelo Bruno. The Philadelphia Mafia boss frequently visits Miami, staying at the home of Charles Costello at 12468 North Bayshore Drive. Wackenhut disclosed that members of the Chicago mob recently held a meeting in South Dade County. Attendees included John Cerrone, Louis Rosanova, and Leonard Gianola. These gatherings, according to Wackenhut, underscore the national coordination of organized crime with Florida as a significant hub. Wackenhut named several additional organized crime bosses operating in Miami and surrounding areas. Vincent, Jimmy Blue Eyes. Arlo resides at 1245 Monroe Street, Hollywood. Anthony, Fat Tony. Salerno resides at 1041 North Venetian Drive, Miami. George, blah blah, Smurra, resides at 1706 Dewey Street, Hollywood. Thomas Greco, a winter resident at the Taormina Apartments, Hallandale. Gaetano Ricci, also known as Tony Goebbels. resides at 13 and 32 Van Buren Street, Hollywood. Thomas Altamura, also known as Thomas Melba, resides at Harbor Tower Apartments, 7904 West Drive, North Bay Village. Joseph Joe Scotch. Indelicato operates the Playboy Tobacco Shop at 8000 Biscayne Boulevard, Miami. John Angasola, also known as John King, resides at 58 and 85 Miller Road. William Black Bill Tocco, a winter resident at 2070 Northeast 121 Road. Dominic Fats Corrado, a winter resident at 1060 Northeast 121 Road. Wackenhut emphasized that Santo Traficante Jr.'s organization exerts significant control over the Tampa Bay and Orlando areas, coordinating with Bolita operations across state lines. The Tampa Bay operation involves more than a dozen Mafia members, while Traficante's lieutenant, Samuel Cacciatore, directs operations throughout Central Florida, often working with the Harland-Blackburn organization. Wackenhut's testimony highlights the extensive reach of organized crime in Florida, from local Bolita rings to high-level investments in real estate and gambling operations. His revelations underscore the need for intensified efforts to combat the Mafia's entrenched presence in the state. As the Legislative Committee deliberates on establishing a statewide crime force, Wackenhut's findings serve as a sobering reminder of the scope and influence of organized crime in Florida. On Wednesday, April 17, 1968, the Los Angeles Times reported the ongoing perjury trial of Ruby Lazarus, a Miami Beach bookmaker accused of lying about his involvement in the 1965 Little Appalachian meeting in Palm Springs. This clandestine gathering included Mafia figures like Vincent Arlo and Anthony Salerno, and highlighted organized crime's grip on illegal gambling operations. 2 witnesses who attended the meeting are set to testify, with the prosecution presenting evidence of a $22,675 gambling debt tied to Lazarus. The trial sheds light on the intersection of the Mafia, bookmaking, and Las Vegas casinos, further unraveling organized crime's far-reaching influence. 2 individuals who attended the infamous Little Appalachian meeting of notorious gamblers in Palm Springs, California, are set to testify for the government in the perjury trial of Ruby Lazarus. Known in his heyday as Fat Ruby, Lazarus, a Miami Beach bookmaker, stands accused of lying to a federal grand jury about the nature of the gathering, which took place over 5 or 6 days in October 1965. The meeting, held in a Palm Springs home, included notable figures such as Vincent, Jimmy Blue Eyes, Allo, and Anthony, Fat Tony, Salerno, both alleged members of the New York Mafia family led by Vito Genovese. Additional participants included Jerome, Jerry Zarowitz, and Elliot Paul Price, both associated with the Caesars Palace Hotel Casino on the Las Vegas Strip. Actress Victoria Lockwood, who had been previously identified as present at the meeting, appears on the government's list of prospective witnesses. Another attendee, showgirl Carolyn Kikumura, also known as Carol Kimura, an Oriental beauty, was granted immunity to testify before the grand jury, but is not listed as a witness for the trial. Assistant U.S. Attorney Gerald Uhlman told the jury that 2 witnesses who were inside the Palm Springs home will testify about the events. Their testimony is expected to include details of a dispute over a large amount of money Ruby Lazarus had lost and not repaid. Uhlman also stated that records seized during an FBI raid on a Miami bookmaking operation will be introduced as evidence. These records allegedly show an account on which Lazarus owed $22,675,000. Lazarus is being defended by Miami Beach attorney David Rosen in collaboration with Los Angeles attorney Thomas Call. The defense contends that Lazarus was merely a guest of Price and Zarowitz at the Palm Springs home and had no involvement in any bookmaking activities. Rosen argued that any phone calls made from the residents to alleged bookmakers were likely placed by Price or Zarowitz. Furthermore, Rosen suggested that evidence would show Price, not Lazarus, was the customer of the Miami bookmakers. After the jury, composed of 6 men and 6 women, was seated, U.S. District Judge Avery Crary tentatively ruled that the jury must not be informed of Lazarus's prior invocation of the Fifth Amendment before the grand jury, or the fact that he served 7 months in jail for refusing to testify. Former Assistant U.S. Attorney Richard Coleman, who originally led the grand jury investigation, testified that the inquiry was focused on uncovering evidence of interstate transmission of wagering information, a federal offense. The trial brings to light the broader connections between organized crime and illegal gambling operations, showcasing how high-profile figures from the Mafia and the Las Vegas casino industry intersected. The Palm Springs meeting, dubbed Little Appalachian after the infamous 1957 gathering of Mafia leaders in Appalachian, New York, underscores the ongoing scrutiny of organized crime's influence across state lines. The outcome of Ruby Lazarus's trial may provide further insight into the clandestine world of gambling rackets and the Mafia's role in orchestrating such operations. In a courtroom saga laced with intrigue and high-stakes gambling, an alluring Las Vegas showgirl took the stand Thursday to unveil the clandestine dealings of a 1965 meeting among some of the nation's most notorious gamblers and mob figures. Victoria Lockwood, a 28-year-old performer, testified in federal court that she was present at a Palm Springs residence during what federal authorities have dubbed the Little Appalachian meeting. This week-long gathering of gambling elites, held from October 12th to October 18th, 1965, reportedly took place at 893 Camino del Sur. Among those in attendance, Miss Lockwood claimed, were Ruby Lazarus, the Miami Beach gambler once infamously nicknamed Fat Ruby, Vincent, Jimmy Blue Eyes, Allo, and Anthony, Fat Tony, Salerno, prominent members of the Vito Genovese Mafia family in New York, as well as Jerome, Jerry, Zarowitz, and Elliot Paul Price, both allegedly tied to the Caesars Palace Hotel Casino in Las Vegas. The meeting, shrouded in secrecy, is believed to have centered on discussions of territorial control in a nationwide bookmaking empire. Miss Lockwood recounted that while conversations unfolded, she was occasionally asked to leave the room, a telling detail that hinted at the meeting's illicit nature. Her testimony came during the perjury trial of Lazarus, now 58, who stands accused of lying 7 times under oath to a federal grand jury investigating the Palm Springs meeting. Lazarus initially invoked his Fifth Amendment rights, but was later granted immunity in exchange for truthful testimony. However, after spending 7 months in jail for refusing to testify, Lazarus voluntarily returned to the grand jury only to allegedly commit perjury, a decision that now places him at the center of a legal firestorm. Miss Lockwood's journey to the witness stand has been far from ordinary. 2 years prior, when subpoenaed to testify before the grand jury, she was deemed to be in a suicidal mental state by a psychiatrist. Despite this diagnosis, a federal judge ordered her testimony under a promise of immunity. Her revelations included seeing Lazarus at the Palm Springs residence, actively engaged in phone calls, an activity now central to allegations that he placed bets with Miami bookmakers during the meeting, a charge he later denied under oath. United States District Judge Avery Crary presided over the current proceedings, where a jury of 6 men and 6 women listened intently as Miss Lockwood pieced together the shadowy puzzle of the Gamblers' Summit. The Palm Springs meeting, now immortalized as the Little Appalachian, offers a rare glimpse into the murky underworld where mobsters and gambling magnates convened to carve up a lucrative empire. As Lazarus faces the weight of perjury charges, the courtroom drama continues to expose the deep-seated ties between organized crime and America's gambling industry. Meanwhile, Victoria Lockwood's testimony, a blend of glamour, tragedy, and gritty truth, casts a long shadow over the mythos of Palm Springs' sunlit paradise. On Saturday, April 20, 1968, the Los Angeles Times reported that Ruby Lazarus, a former Miami Beach bookmaker, was convicted on 3 counts of perjury tied to the infamous 1965 Little Appalachian meeting in Palm Springs. The gathering, attended by Mafia figures such as Anthony Salerno and Vincent Allo, was part of a federal investigation into interstate wagering and racketeering. Lazarus, found guilty of lying about his gambling activities and phone use at the meeting, now faces up to 15 years in prison and $6,000 in fines. The case underscores the federal government's resolve to target organized crime figures obstructing justice. Ruby Lazarus, a former Miami Beach bookmaker who attended the Little Appalachian meeting of notorious gamblers in Palm Springs, was convicted on Friday by a federal court jury on 3 counts of perjury. United States District Judge E. Avery Crary granted defense motions for acquittal on 4 other perjury counts, citing insufficient evidence to support those charges. The judge ordered a pre-sentence probation investigation and scheduled a hearing for May 20th to address defense motions and impose sentencing. Lazarus, 58 years old and now residing in New York, was allowed to remain free on a $10,000 bond. He faces a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison and a $2,000 fine on each count, amounting to a possible total of 15 years and $6,000 in fines. The case stemmed from an investigation into potential violations of federal interstate wagering and racketeering laws during a gathering of gamblers at a Palm Springs home in October 1965, coinciding with the World Series. The meeting allegedly included high-profile attendees: Anthony, Fat Tony, Salerno, a reputed member of the New York Mafia; Vincent, Jimmy Blue Eyes; Allo, another prominent New York Mafia figure; Jerome, Jerry Zarowitz, and Elliot Paul Price, gamblers associated with Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. Other attendees included actress Victoria Lockwood, showgirl Carol Kimura, houseboy John Sullivan, Lockwood's son, and Tommy Guinan, the brother of the late nightclub hostess Texas Guinan. Although a federal grand jury ultimately issued no indictments related to wagering and racketeering, Lazarus was charged with perjury after serving a 7-month jail term for initially refusing to testify before the grand jury. Lazarus was found guilty of lying under oath when he testified that he had not used the telephones at the Palm Springs residence. He was also convicted of falsely stating that he had never placed a bet with a bookmaker other than Mickey Zion, and specifically that he had not placed bets with the Prokos brothers, John, the Greek, and Chris Prokos, both Miami-based bookmakers. However, Lazarus was acquitted of other perjury charges, including lying about whether gambling or financial disputes were discussed at the Palm Springs meeting, denying the use of multiple sports news service of Miami or similar agencies to obtain line information for wagering purposes. The convictions highlight the federal government's broader efforts to investigate and prosecute individuals involved in organized gambling operations and mafia-related activities. While the Little Appalachian meeting did not lead to direct indictments for interstate wagering or racketeering, the perjury charges against Lazarus reflect the legal risks faced by those who obstruct federal investigations. As the sentencing date approaches, the outcome of this case underscores the government's commitment to holding organized crime figures accountable for perjury and other offenses. On Monday, May 27, 1968, the Miami Herald reported that Ruby Lazarus, the former Miami Beach bookmaker known as Fat Ruby, was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison and fined $1,000 for perjury. Convicted in April, Lazarus was found guilty of lying to a federal grand jury about his role in the 1965 Little Appalachian meeting in Palm Springs, a gathering of gamblers and mafia figures like Vincent Allo and Anthony Salerno. The case highlights federal efforts to target organized crime figures, obstructing investigations into gambling and mafia operations. Lazarus remains free on bond pending appeal. Former Miami Beach bookmaker Ruby Lazarus, known as Fat Ruby, was sentenced in Los Angeles on Monday to 2.5 years in prison for lying to a federal grand jury during a gambling investigation. United States District Judge Avery Crary also fined Lazarus $1,000. Despite the sentence, Lazarus was allowed to remain free on a $10,000 bond while his appeal is pending. Lazarus, 57 years old and now residing in New York City, was convicted on April 9th of 3 perjury charges. The charges stemmed from his testimony about a meeting of gamblers held at a desert resort in Palm Springs, California, in October 1965. Lazarus was indicted on perjury charges in November after initially refusing to testify before the grand jury, despite being granted immunity from prosecution. His refusal resulted in a 7-month jail term for contempt of court. The indictment claimed that when Lazarus eventually testified, he lied under oath. The Palm Springs meeting allegedly included high-ranking Mafia figures Vincent, Jimmy Blue Eyes, Allo and Anthony, Fat Tony, Salerno, both members of the Vito Genovese crime family. According to federal authorities, the meeting took place in the apartment of 2 showgirls and revolved around discussions of gambling operations and ownership stakes in the Caesars Palace Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. The grand jury accused Lazarus of falsely denying that gambling was discussed at the meeting or that a dispute occurred over a large sum of money. Additionally, he was accused of lying about his involvement in Miami gambling activities. Ruby Lazarus's criminal history dates back decades. In 1948, he was banned from Florida racetracks by the State Racing Commission. In 1966, after Lazarus and other gamblers were seen watching a high school football game at the Orange Bowl, the Miami City Commission attempted to bar them from attending school games, though this action was later deemed unconstitutional. In 1959, Lazarus and fellow Miami Beach gambler Jerome Zarowitz were questioned by a federal grand jury investigating syndicate gambling operations in Terre Haute, Indiana. Both men invoked their Fifth Amendment rights, refusing to answer questions on the grounds that their responses might be self-incriminating. Zarowitz, who was also involved in the Palm Springs meeting, served a 20-month jail term for attempting to fix a professional football game in 1946. The Palm Springs meeting and subsequent investigations highlight the intersection of organized crime, gambling operations, and mafia influence in legitimate businesses like the Caesars Palace Hotel and Casino. The case against Ruby Lazarus underscores federal efforts to crack down on organized crime figures who obstruct investigations through perjury or contempt. While Lazarus's appeal is pending, his conviction serves as a reminder of the legal risks associated with lying under oath, particularly when dealing with federal investigations into organized crime. In a dramatic operation that sent shockwaves through the underworld, the Federal Bureau of Investigation announced the arrest of Raymond, Spanish John Marquez, a sharp-dressed 40-foot yacht-owning figure accused of masterminding a sprawling $25 million a year policy racket. The 39-year-old Marquez, whose criminal enterprise stretched across Harlem and Spanish Harlem, was apprehended yesterday on West 79th Street, just steps from where his power cruiser, Latin Doll, rested at the city marina. Marquez, reputedly under the protection of Mafia heavyweights like Anthony, Fat Tony Salerno, and the Vito Genovese family, was intercepted by federal agents as he slid into his Lincoln Continental. Armed with a federal bench warrant, authorities arrested Marquez on interstate gambling charges, the result of a 2-year investigation targeting one of New York's most lucrative and deeply entrenched illegal operations. Federal prosecutors claim Marquez's policy racket was an intricate machine, running 2 distinct gambling schemes. By day, it was a high-volume numbers racket. By night, a shadowy operation with its own banking system and unique betting framework. His alleged criminal ingenuity had made him one of the most formidable racketeers in the city, amassing enough wealth to live in a $75,000 home at 40 Keats Lane in Great Neck, Long Island, where he resides with his wife and 2 children. Marquez's arrest is tied to a sweeping federal indictment involving 6 others arrested last year during coordinated raids in New York City and Newark, New Jersey. He has been charged with 2 of 3 counts in the indictment and is simultaneously awaiting trial in New York State Supreme Court on bribery charges for allegedly paying off police officers. Adding to his rap sheet, Marquez has already served time for contempt after stonewalling investigators who sought to penetrate his labyrinthine operations. At the time of his arrest, federal agents discovered $9,500 in cash stashed in his car, a tantalizing hint of the vast sums flowing through his racket. Marquez was released on $100,000 in personal recognizance bail, with $5,000 paid up front in cash. If he flees jurisdiction, he faces personal liability for the full amount. United States Attorney Robert Morgenthau hailed the arrest as a pivotal step in dismantling the stranglehold of organized crime on illicit gambling. Marquez's alleged ties to Salerno and the Genovese family illuminate the enduring nexus between Mafia power players and the shadow economy of policy rackets. As Marquez now faces the combined weight of federal and state charges, his arrest may signal the unraveling of one of New York's most lucrative criminal enterprises. Yet, in the tangled web of organized crime, the question remains: how many more like Spanish John are waiting in the wings to fill the void? On Friday, August 22, 1969, the Sheboygan Press featured Jack Anderson's analysis of Las Vegas's evolving landscape. While figures like Howard Hughes and Nathan Jacobson have sought to reform Glitter City by driving out mobsters and introducing legitimate business practices, the influence of the underworld lingers. Casinos like Caesar's Palace, the Stardust, and the Dunes are still tied to figures with criminal pasts, such as Jerome Zarowitz and Sidney Wyman. Beneath the family-friendly veneer and neon allure, Las Vegas remains a paradox, where past shadows persist despite efforts to redefine its image. Things are said to be changing in Glitter City, USA, but whether those changes go beyond appearances is still up for debate. The front offices of the neon-lit casinos have adopted a more respectable veneer, but the back rooms may tell a different story. Until 1966, the most extravagant hotel casinos in this desert resort were controlled by Mafia mobsters, who siphoned off an estimated $50 million a year through skimming, pocketing cash before it was entered into the books to avoid taxes. The transformation began when industrial magnate Howard Hughes arrived in Las Vegas in a private rail car. Hughes purchased approximately $200 million worth of property along the Las Vegas Strip, ousting a number of racketeers. He was soon followed by other legitimate operators, further displacing the mobsters. Among these new businessmen was Nathan S. Jacobson, a former Baltimore insurance executive who built Caesar's Palace, considered the most glamorous casino in town. Jacobson, known for his intense demeanor and passion for justice, became a leading figure in Las Vegas's cleanup movement and chaired the Strip Beautification Commission. Jacobson recently sold his interest in Caesar's Palace to take over the presidency of the Bonanza Hotel Casino for the Levin Townsend Computer Corporation. At Bonanza, Jacobson has implemented a think tank approach to gambling, hiring Jess Markham, a former mathematician at the Rand Corporation, to develop more scientific games of chance. He is also constructing King's Castle, a Camelot-inspired gambling emporium on the shores of Lake Tahoe. Despite efforts by Hughes and Jacobson, traces of the old mob-run Vegas remain. Since Jacobson relinquished control of Caesar's Palace, the casino has come under the management of Jerome Zarowitz, a figure under intense scrutiny by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Zarowitz was convicted in the 1950s for fixing football games to improve his gambling odds. His frequent associates include Mafia figures Anthony, Fat Tony, Salerno, and Ruby Lazarus, the latter currently facing bookmaking charges in New York City. At the Stardust Casino, owned by Parvin Dorman Corporation, decision-making on credit privileges rests with By Goldbaum, an ex-convict with 14 convictions ranging from assault to income tax evasion. The Fremont and Aladdin casinos, also owned by Parvin Dorman, are managed by Edward Torres, a controversial figure who was once a business partner of Bobby Baker, a former Senate insider. During Senate hearings, Torres was described as a racketeer and accused of skimming, though the charges were eventually dropped. The Dunes, owned by Continental Connector Corporation, is controlled by Sidney Wyman and Charles Cupie Rich, both known bookmakers. Their former associate, Israel Ice Pick Willie Alderman, has faced accusations of murder, larceny and other crimes, though he has never been convicted. Las Vegas remains a paradoxical blend of family-friendly entertainment and lingering underworld influence. Neon lights and garish signs beckon visitors with promises of indulgence, while family-oriented attractions are increasingly marketed to a broader audience. Tourists no longer need to hesitate when telling their families they've visited the Strip, yet the presence of prostitutes, seasoned gamblers, and shadowy figures persists. Howard Hughes, the uncrowned king of Las Vegas, directs his expanding empire from a heavily guarded suite inside the Desert Inn. Hughes remains unseen, reportedly due to his near-total deafness, which he views as a liability in high-stakes business negotiations. Once driven out of Los Angeles by smog, Hughes now expresses concerns over radiation from underground atomic testing in Nevada, which threatens the clean desert air he moved to enjoy. Hughes has used his wealth to influence politics. His contributions reportedly kept Larry O'Brien on as campaign manager for Hubert Humphrey during the previous year's Democratic presidential campaign. Meanwhile, Hughes's chief lieutenant, Robert Maheu, donated heavily to the Republican cause, collaborating with Nixon confidant Bebe Rebozo and the president's brother, Don Nixon. Las Vegas may be trying to turn a new page, but beneath the glitz and glamour, the past lingers in the shadows. While figures like Howard Hughes and Nathan Jacobson attempt to redefine the city, questions remain about whether the old underworld influence can ever be entirely erased.